He was dismissed, disrespected, and discarded, all before his flight even left the ground. Marcus Thorne, a black CEO in a simple hoodie, held a $4,000 first-class ticket. But the flight crew saw something else. They saw a man who didn't belong and banished him to a middle seat in the back of the plane. They thought they had all the power. What they didn't know was that as of 9 a.m. that morning, Marcus Thorne didn't just have a ticket, he owned the airline. And in 30 minutes, their careers would be over. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was thick with the usual weekday chaos, a frantic symphony of rolling suitcases, garbled announcements, and the sharp, acidic scent of burnt coffee. To Marcus Thorne, it was just noise. He moved through the crowd with an easy, athletic grace, his 6'2" frame cutting a path through the throngs of travelers. He was dressed for comfort, not for boardroom intimidation. A pair of expensive but understated grey joggers, fresh white sneakers, and a black cashmere hoodie with the hood pulled down. The only hint of his true status was the platinum IWC watch on his left wrist, a subtle glint of engineering excellence that went unnoticed by the tidal wave of people. Marcus was exhausted, but a deep, thrumming current of victory ran beneath the fatigue. At 9:07 a.m., after a 72-hour marathon negotiating session, the ink had dried. Thorne Dynamics, the tech and logistics empire he had built from a single algorithm in his college dorm, had officially acquired Global Transport Holdings, a $90 billion conglomerate. And tucked deep within that conglomerate's portfolio, like a nesting doll, was Aero Wing Airlines, the very airline he was about to fly. He was flying to Los Angeles to begin the long, arduous process of the transition, starting with an all-hands meeting at the Aero Wing corporate campus near LAX. His phone buzzed, as it had been doing every 30 seconds. This time it was Sarah Jenkins, his general counsel. He answered, keeping his voice low. "Sarah, tell me good news." "The wire transfers are complete," she said, her voice crisp even through the receiver. "The SEC filing will drop at market close. It's done, Marcus. You did it. You actually did it." Marcus allowed himself a small, tired smile. "Good. Thank you, Sarah. I'm about to board. I'll be off-grid for about 5 hours. Hold the fort." "Will do, Mr. Thorne. Have a safe flight." He ended the call and approached Gate 22, where Aero Wing Flight 212 to LAX was already in the process of boarding. He navigated to the first-class, Platinum Elite lane. There were only 2 people in front of him. When he reached the podium, the gate agent, a man in his late 20s with a severe haircut and a name tag reading Ben, gave him a look that started at his sneakers and ended at his face with visible skepticism. "Good morning," Marcus said, pulling up the digital boarding pass on his phone. Ben didn't return the greeting. He held out the scanner, and Marcus placed his phone under it. The scanner beeped with an angry, negative tone. "It's not scanning," Ben said flatly, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "That's odd," Marcus replied, unfazed. "It's the app. Can you try typing in the confirmation code?" Ben sighed, a theatrical puff of exasperation. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some ID, and the credit card you used to purchase the ticket." Marcus blinked. This was highly irregular for a first-class check-in. "Fine." He pulled out his driver's license and his corporate Amex black card. He handed them over. Ben took them, and his eyes widened almost imperceptibly as he saw the name. Marcus Thorne. He looked at the license, then at Marcus, then back at the license. And this is your credit card? Yes, it is. And you purchased a first-class fare ticket? Yes, Marcus said, his patience beginning to fray. Seat 1A, is there a problem? Ben turned to his computer and typed with agonizing slowness. He pecked at the keys, his brow furrowed, as if the concept of a Marcus Thorne in first class was a complex puzzle his system couldn't solve. The passengers in the economy line were beginning to stare, sensing a confrontation. Ben said, drawing the sound out. This is very strange. The system is showing an operational error. An operational error? Marcus repeated, his voice dangerously level. What does that mean? It means, sir, Ben said, finally looking up and meeting his gaze, that we've had to make a change to your seating assignment. We have a full flight today and had to accommodate a few priority passengers. We've managed to find you a seat in economy, 34B. Marcus was stunned into silence for a brief second. 34B. A middle seat, in the back. He had specifically booked 1A, the bulkhead window, so he could work undisturbed for the entire flight. No, Marcus said simply. That's not acceptable. I am a fully paid first-class ticket holder. I am also a Platinum Elite member. You cannot downgrade me without cause. Ben's veneer of customer service dropped, replaced by a cold, bureaucratic indifference. Sir, as per our contract of carriage, we reserve the right to change seating for any operational, safety, or security reason. The flight is full. There are no other seats in the premium cabin. So you gave my seat away, Marcus stated. It wasn't a question. We accommodated a passenger who needed the seat, Ben said evasively. Who? Sir, I'm not at liberty to discuss other passengers. Now, here is your new boarding pass. He printed a flimsy piece of paper and slid it across the counter. You're in boarding group 5, which is boarding now. You need to get on the plane, or you'll be left behind. Take it or leave it. Marcus looked at the smirking gate agent. He looked at the line of people watching him. He knew he could cause a scene here. He could pull out his phone, call Sarah, and have this entire gate shut down. He could have Ben fired before the plane even pushed back, but that wasn't his style. He was a builder, not a wrecking ball. He preferred to diagnose a problem before he fixed it. And right now, he wanted to see just how deep this rot went. Fine, Marcus said, taking the flimsy pass for 34B. I'll be speaking to the purser on board. You do that, sir, Ben said, his smirk widening as he turned to the next passenger. Enjoy your flight. Marcus walked down the jet bridge, the flimsy paper feeling like an insult in his hand. The problem, he suspected, was just beginning. The interior of the Aero Wing 767 was a familiar territory, but the walk was not. Marcus passed the curtain separating the spacious Delta One-style pods of first class, his eyes instinctively going to 1A. The seat was already occupied. A young woman, blonde and impeccably made up, was already settled in, phone in hand, expertly framing a selfie with the curved bulkhead. She looked to be in her early 20s, and she was loudly detailing her amazing partnership with Aero Wing to her followers. Marcus paused, and that's when he met the second point of failure. Her name tag read Sandra, and beneath it, lead flight attendant. She was in her late 40s with hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin, and a smile that was all teeth. She was in the middle of handing a glass of pre-departure champagne to a man in 1B, a portly man in a tailored suit who was already looking at Marcus with open curiosity. When Sandra saw Marcus standing there, Her smile evaporated. It wasn't just a loss of warmth. It was an active, instantaneous shift into a mask of cold suspicion. "Sir," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "may I help you? The economy cabin is that way." She pointed toward the back of the plane as if giving directions to a lost child. "I know where the economy cabin is," Marcus said, holding his ground. "I'm here because there's been a mistake. My original ticket is for seat 1A. Sandra let out a short, sharp laugh, almost a bark. She glanced at the woman in 1A, then back at Marcus. "Sir, as you can see, 1A is occupied. This is Miss Collins. She's our guest." "She's your guest and I'm your customer," Marcus countered, his voice low and firm. "I paid over $4,000 for that specific seat. The gate agent, Ben, downgraded me without explanation. I need you to fix this." The man in 1B, Mr. Henderson, scoffed audibly. "Buddy, just take the L and go to your seat. You're holding up the line." Marcus ignored him, his eyes locked on Sandra. "Ma'am, I am a Platinum Elite member. You can check your manifest. My name is Marcus Thorne. I am supposed to be in 1A. Sandra's face hardened. The faux politeness was gone, replaced with the unyielding arrogance of someone who wields a small amount of power, as if it were a scepter. "Sir, I have checked the manifest," she lied, not even glancing at the tablet in her hand. "The manifest, which is a federal document, by the way, states that Ms. Collins is in 1A and you—" She leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hiss, "are in 34B. Now, I don't know how you managed to get a first-class boarding pass in the first place, or what story you told the gate agent, but your actual seat is in the back, with the others." The implication hung in the air, thick and toxic, with the others. Marcus felt a cold fury, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years, rise in his chest. He prided himself on his control. He had faced down hostile boards, skeptical investors, and cutthroat competitors. But this casual, ugly prejudice was something different. It was personal. "What did you just say?" he asked. Sandra, realizing she may have overstepped, shifted tactics. "Sir, you are creating a disturbance. You are interfering with a flight crew in the performance of their duties. That is a federal offense. I need you to go to your assigned seat immediately." "I am not creating a disturbance. I am a customer asking for the service I paid for." "You are refusing to comply with crew instructions," Sandra snapped. "Mark!" A younger flight attendant appeared from the galley, his eyes wide. "What's wrong, Sandra?" "This passenger is non-compliant. He's refusing to go to his seat. He's trying to get into the first-class cabin." "I'm not trying to get in," Marcus said, his voice rising despite himself. "I belong here." "That's enough," Sandra said, her voice now loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "I want to speak to the captain." "Good," Marcus said, crossing his arms. "So do I." The passengers in the first few rows of economy were now rubbernecking, their phones held up discreetly, recording. Ms. Collins in 1A had her own phone pointed directly at him, a look of annoyed fascination on her face, as if he were street performance art gone wrong. "This is so crazy," she narrated to her phone. "This guy is trying to, steal my seat. He's making us all late. Ugh, the drama." Marcus looked at the phone, then at Sandra, who was now puffing herself up, readying for the arrival of the pilot. He was trapped in a Kafkaesque nightmare, and he was the only one who knew the punchline. The curtain from the cockpit was pushed aside, and Captain Robert Miller emerged. He was the archetype of a senior pilot: silver hair, a square jaw, and an air of absolute, unassailable authority. He had the look of a man who hadn't been questioned by anyone, including his wife, since 1995. He strode into the galley, his eyes immediately landing on Marcus. "What's the problem here, Sandra?" he boomed. "Captain, thank you for coming," Sandra said, laying on the drama. "This gentleman forced his way past me into the cabin. He's claiming his seat is 1A, and he's refusing to take his assigned seat in economy. I've told him he's interfering with our pre-flight duties, but he's non-compliant. We're going to be late." Captain Miller's gaze on Marcus was dissecting. He saw the hoodie, the joggers, the color of his skin. He didn't see a $4,000 ticket. He saw a problem. "Son," the captain said, his voice a low rumble. "I don't know what kind of confusion there is, but on my aircraft, the manifest is law. My lead attendant says your seat is 34B. The gate agent says your seat is 34B. That means your seat is 34B. "Captain," Marcus said, forcing calm into his voice, "my name is Marcus Thorne. I am a paying customer. My original confirmed ticket, which I purchased months ago, is for seat 1A. Your gate agent, Ben Foster, downgraded me without cause. Your purser, Sandra Davis, has accused me of forcing my way onto the plane. All I am asking is for you to look at the original booking. You'll see I'm right." The captain scoffed. "I'm not looking up anything. We have a manifest. It's final. I don't know what you're trying to pull, but it's not going to work. Not on my flight." "So you are refusing to even verify my ticket?" "I am refusing to delay this flight for 200 other passengers because you don't like your seat," Miller corrected him. "This is the final word. You have two choices. You can turn around, walk back to 34B, sit down, and be quiet. Or you can get off my plane. If you argue with me again, I'm not asking. I'm calling the Port Authority police, and I'll have you removed. Am I clear?" The threat hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Marcus looked at the three of them. Captain Miller, stern and immovable, Sandra, smirking in triumph, and Ben, who had reappeared at the jet bridge door, drawn by the conflict, a look of smug, "I told you so" on his face. They were a united front of dismissal. This was the culture. This was the rot. It wasn't one bad employee. It was a systemic failure of leadership, right up to the captain's seat. He had his answer. Marcus Thorne, the man who had just acquired the entire airline, nodded slowly. "You're perfectly clear, Captain." He turned, not giving Sandra the satisfaction of another look. He could feel her smile. He could feel the eyes of every passenger in first class on his back, a mixture of pity, annoyance, and relief. He began the long, humiliating walk of shame. He pushed past the galley, through the curtain into Economy Plus, and then into the narrowing tube of the main cabin. He walked past, row after row of passengers, all of them staring, some whispering. He finally reached row 34. 34B was, as expected, a middle seat. To his right, by the window, was a woman with a baby who was already fussing. To his left, in the aisle seat, was a heavy-set man, headphones on, who was already asleep and encroaching on a good 30% of the middle seat. Marcus slid in, his knees crushed against the seat in front of him. The cabin door slammed shut. The plane began to push back from the gate. Sandra's voice came over the PA system, obnoxiously cheerful. "Ladies and gentlemen, we do apologize for that slight delay. It appears we had a passenger who was confused about his seating. But we've got that all sorted out now. A few passengers chuckled. Marcus just stared at the seatback in front of him. He pulled out his phone. The in-flight Wi-Fi Connect logo was already illuminated. He tapped the screen. He paid $49.90 for the high-speed satellite package without a second thought. As the plane began its slow taxi toward the runway, a high-speed connection bloomed to life. 30 minutes, he whispered to himself. That's all he needed. The cabin was a cacophony. The baby to his right had escalated from fussing to a full-throated wail. The man to his left was snoring, a wet, rattling sound that seemed to vibrate through the armrest. Marcus Thorne, one of the wealthiest men in the country, was pinned. He was uncomfortable, he was furious, and he was, for the first time in a decade, deeply, profoundly disappointed. He had bought AeroWing as part of the GTH acquisition because it was a legacy brand. It had history. He'd intended to invest in it, to make it the premier American carrier, a symbol of a new, dynamic, and inclusive era of travel. Instead, his first experience as its owner was a case study in everything that was wrong with it. The prejudice, the entitlement, the unadulterated abuse of power. He opened his secure email client. He had 30 minutes. He began to type. His first email was to Sarah Jenkins, his general counsel, and David Chen, his chief operating officer. To Sarah Jenkins, David Chen. Subject, urgent, AW22, JFK LAX, code red incident. Body, Sarah, David. I am currently on AeroWing Flight 212, in seat 34B. I was just forcibly downgraded from my confirmed, paid F-fare seat, 1A, by the gate and flight crew. The justification was operational needs. The reality was unambiguous racial profiling. My seat was given away to a social media influencer. When I protested, I was condescended to by the purser and threatened with arrest by the captain. This is a code red. This is not a customer service complaint. It is a critical failure of operations, safety, and corporate culture. David, I need the full employee details for the entire crew of AW22, effective immediately. Specifically, gate agent, gate 22, first name Ben. Lead flight attendant, first name Sandra. Captain, name Miller. I want their full names, employee IDs, and service records on my desk before we land. Sarah, I need you to contact Catherine Price, the, now former, head of HR for Global Transport Holdings. Inform her that as of this moment, she is reporting directly to me. I want her to find the direct satellite phone number for the cockpit of AW22. I also want her to find the direct number for the AeroWing Operations Control Center at JFK. Tell her I will be calling her from the air in 5 minutes. This is her first test. I am handling this personally. Marcus, as he hit send, the message sent confirmation, chimed. He sat back. The baby screamed. The man snored. Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath, compartmentalizing his anger, turning it into the cold, clean fuel of executive action. Less than 2 minutes later, his phone buzzed. A reply from David Chen. From David Chen. Subject, urgent, AW22, JFK LAX. Code red incident. Body, Marcus, this is appalling. I am on it. Pulled the manifest and crew roster from the GTH servers. Your new access codes worked. Gate agent, Ben Foster. Employee ID 44921. Lead purser, Sandra Davis. Employee ID 19933. Captain, Robert Miller. Employee ID 0421. All 3 files are attached. A preliminary glance at Davis's file shows 14 customer complaints in the last 24 months, 8 of them alleging discriminatory behavior. Miller's file is clean, but he's a union senior. This will be messy. Sending the data to Sarah now. Good luck. Marcus's jaw tightened. 14 complaints. Sandra Davis was a known problem, a liability that HR had allowed to fester. Miller was a protected entity, and Ben Foster was the foot soldier enabling them both. His phone buzzed again, this time an email from Catherine Price, the HR executive. From Catherine Price, subject, re-urgent, via Sarah Jenkins. Your request, Mr. Thorne. Welcome aboard. I am shocked and appalled by what Sarah has just relayed. Per your request, JFK Ops Control Center, secure line. Number, ask for Frank Dempsey, shift supervisor, AW222, cockpit sat link, emergency. Number. I am standing by for any and all further instructions. I am already in my car, en route to JFK. Catherine Marcus looked at the two numbers. The plane was, at this point, number 5 in line for takeoff on the taxiway. He could hear the engines whine as they inched forward. He didn't have 30 minutes. He had 30 seconds. He made a decision. This would not be handled on landing. This would be handled now. He dialed the number for the Ops Control Center. JFK Ops, Dempsey speaking. The voice was gruff, stressed. Mr. Dempsey, my name is Marcus Thorne. Who? Sir, this is a secure line for airline operations. How did you get this number? I am the new chairman of Global Transport Holdings, the parent company of Aerowing, as of 9 a.m. this morning. There was a heavy pause. Sir, I have not been advised of that. You will be. Check your corporate email. You should have a memo from Catherine Price. But we don't have time for that. I am currently a passenger on Flight 212, which is on your taxiway. I need you to do 2 things for me. First, patch me through to Captain Robert Miller's SAT link, directly. Second, I need you to order Captain Miller to return to Gate 22 immediately. Return to the... Sir, we can't do that. They're about to take off. It'll clog the entire runway. That requires a security or safety justification. Then give them one, Marcus said, his voice dropping to an icy calm. Tell them there is a code-red manifest discrepancy originating from the chairman's office. That is your justification. And Frank? My next call is to the head of the FAA if that plane's wheels leave the ground. Do you understand me? A manifest? Yes, sir. Dempsey's voice was now trembling. Yes, sir. Patching you to the cockpit now, and I'll issue the recall order to the tower. The line clicked. He was being patched through. 20 minutes had passed since he was thrown out of first class. The clock was ticking. In the cockpit of Flight 212, Captain Robert Miller was running through his final pre-takeoff checklist with his first officer, a younger man named Tim. They were third in line. Flaps set, Tim was saying. Check. Flight controls. Miller was cut off by a sharp, unusual beep from the console. It wasn't the radio. It was the satellite phone, the one reserved for high-level emergencies, medical diversions, security threats, mechanical failures. Miller's blood ran cold. He picked up the receiver. This is Captain Miller. Captain, this is Marcus Thorne. Miller frowned. The name was familiar. He'd just... Who is this? How did you get this number? This is a restricted cockpit line. I am the new chairman of Global Transport Holdings, Marcus's voice said, clear and cold as the air at 30,000 feet. That is the company that owns Aerowing, the company that signs your paycheck. I am also the man you threatened to have arrested not 20 minutes ago. I am currently sitting in seat 34B. The first officer's head snapped around, his eyes as wide as saucers. Captain Miller's brain short-circuited. He couldn't process the words. Sir, that's not possible. There must be a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Captain. You, your purser, Sandra Davis, and your gate agent, Ben Foster, just humiliated a customer in front of an entire plane. You denied him his purchased seat based on his appearance. You threatened him. You violated over a dozen company policies, not to mention federal anti-discrimination statutes. You are a catastrophic liability. Mr. Thorne, I had no idea, Miller stammered, his bravado completely gone, replaced by the shaky panic of a man who just saw his pension evaporate. The purser, she said. The manifest. I was just following procedure. You were not following procedure. Marcus's voice was no longer calm. It was a blade. Procedure would have been to check the original booking. Procedure would have been to de-escalate. Procedure would have been to treat a customer with baseline human dignity. You chose to threaten and dismiss. Sir, please, what can I do? I'll have him moved. I'll apologize. Oh, you'll do more than that. Here is what is going to happen, Captain. This plane is not taking off. You are returning to the gate. Immediately. Just then, the radio from the tower crackled. Aerowing 212, hold your position. We have a recall order from your ops center. Return to gate 22. Advise when clear of the taxiway. The first officer looked at Miller, his face pale. Captain. Miller, holding the sat phone, was sweating profusely. Mr. Thorne, they're ordering us back. That was also my doing, Marcus said. I'm telling Ops you have a security manifest discrepancy. Which is true. You have a passenger in 1A who doesn't belong there, and you have a passenger in 34B who really doesn't belong there. Now, put your radio on the cabin PA. I want you to make an announcement. An announcement? What do I say? You will tell the passengers that due to a manifest error, we are returning to the gate. And Captain, when we dock, you will remain in the cockpit. You will not move. You will not speak to anyone but me. And you will send Sandra Davis to seat 34B. She is to personally escort me back to first class. Is that clear? But the passenger in 1A, Miller pleaded. She's an influencer, a guest of the airline. The influencer can move, or she can get off. I don't care. Your only concern right now, Captain, is your own employment. Move this plane. Marcus hung up. In 34B, he put his phone in his pocket. The man next to him woke up as the plane began a slow, heavy turn. What the hell? We're turning around. The baby, mercifully, had cried itself to sleep. A moment later, Captain Miller's voice came over the PA. It was no longer booming and confident. It was thin, shaky, and strained. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. My sincere apologies. It appears we have a serious discrepancy with our passenger manifest. We are required by operations to return to the gate to resolve it. We will do our best to get you on your way as soon as possible. A collective groan filled the cabin. People were furious. Speculation began instantly. It's a bomb threat. Someone's sick. It's that guy who got kicked out of first class. Marcus just stared at the seat back. He looked at his watch. 28 minutes. The taxi back to Gate 22 was the longest of Captain Miller's life. It was done in total silence, save for the first officer's required call-outs. When the 767 finally docked with a soft bump, the fasten seatbelt sign chimed off. In first class, Sandra Davis was already on her feet, a bright, fake smile plastered on her face, ready to manage the confused and angry premium passengers. "Folks, I know this is an unusual delay, but please remain seated. We'll have this sorted." Her cabin phone rang, a specific, internal, three-chirp tone. She picked it up. Purser Davis. It was Captain Miller. His voice was a dead whisper. "Sandra." "Captain, what's going on? What's this manifest discrepancy?" "Sandra," he repeated, his voice cracking. The man in the hoodie. The one we sent to the back." "What about him?" she asked, her stomach twisting. "His name is Marcus Thorne. Sandra, he's the new chairman. He owns the airline. The whole thing." The blood drained from Sandra's face. Her smile didn't just fade, it collapsed. The color left her cheeks, leaving her makeup looking like a grotesque mask on a grey canvas. "What? What did you say?" "He's on the sat phone. He ordered us back. He wants you. He wants you to go to 34B, get him, and escort him to 1A. Now, Sandra, move." Sandra dropped the phone. It clattered against the galley wall. Mr. Henderson in 1B, who had been loudly complaining about the delay, stopped mid-sentence. "Mom? Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sandra didn't answer. She fumbled for the curtain, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grasp it. She burst through it and began to walk, then almost run, down the aisle of the main cabin. Passengers looked up, alarmed by her expression. She was ashen, her eyes wide with pure, unadulterated terror. She arrived at row 34. She saw him. Marcus Thorne, sitting calmly in the middle seat, looking at her as if he'd been expecting her. Her voice came out as a squeak. Mr. Thorne." The man on the aisle woke up. The woman with the baby looked up. The whole section was staring. "That's me," Marcus said, his voice calm. "Sir, please." She was trembling, tears welling in her eyes. "Please, will you come with me? Your seat. It's ready." Marcus slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. He didn't say a word. He eased himself out of the cramped seat and stood in the aisle. He looked at Sandra, and she flinched as if he'd struck her. He began to walk, and she followed, like a prisoner being led by her captive. They did the walk of shame in reverse, but this time all the eyes were on Sandra. The whispers followed them. "That's the guy. What's happening?" "She looks terrified." They reached the first-class cabin. The atmosphere was electric. Marcus walked straight to 1A. Miss Collins, the influencer, looked up from her phone, annoyed. "Oh my God, him again! Are you kidding me? What is going on?" Sandra, finding a tiny sliver of her old authority, said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. There's been a mistake. We need you to move. We have a seat for you in Economy Plus." Tiffany Collins exploded. "Economy! Economy! I am not flying economy. I have a partnership. I have 3 million followers. I'm going to ruin this airline. This is the worst service I have ever." Marcus had had enough. He finally spoke, his voice not loud, but so full of cold authority that it cut through her tirade like a razor. "Miss Davis," he said to Sandra, "tell her why she has to move." Sandra was sobbing now. I can't. Fine, Marcus said. He looked at the influencer. You're in my seat. You're in my seat, on my plane. And as of 9 a.m. this morning, I own this airline. Now move, or get off. The woman's jaw dropped. The vlogging phone lowered. Mr. Henderson in 1B audibly gasped. Miss Collins, for the first time in her life, was speechless. She gathered her assortment of designer bags, her phone and her neck pillow, and without a single word, she scurried past him, disappearing through the curtain. Marcus Thorne sat down in 1A. He stretched his legs out. The seat felt like a throne. He looked at the still sobbing Sandra. Miss Davis, bring me a scotch. Macallan 18. Neat. And while you're at it, send your friend, Ben Foster, from the gate onto this plane. I want a word with him. Sir, he's at the gate. I know, Marcus said, fastening his seatbelt. Get him. Sandra scurried off the plane, her heels clacking on the jet bridge, a sound that seemed to echo with a desperate, frantic energy. The main cabin door remained open, a gaping wound in the side of the fuselage, and a cold draught of terminal air began to creep into the cabin. In first class, the silence was no longer just quiet. It was a heavy, pressurized thing. The other passengers, who had been loudly complaining about the delay just minutes before, were now frozen. Mr. Henderson in 1B, the portly man who had told Marcus to take the L and go to his seat, was now staring intently at the in-flight magazine in his lap, his face a pale, pasty grey, as if he could make himself invisible by sheer force of will. The other passengers were engaged in a similar pretense, their eyes fixed on windows, books, or phone screens, yet every ounce of their attention was focused on seat 1A. Marcus Thorne sat calmly, swirling the amber scotch in his glass. He took a slow, deliberate sip. The Macallan was excellent, but he couldn't taste it. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, replaced by the cold, heavy weight of responsibility. This wasn't a victory, it was a diagnosis. The rot he had just uncovered was deep, a systemic infection of arrogance, prejudice, and apathy. And it was his, all his, to fix. His thoughts were cut short by a new sound from the jet bridge. It wasn't the sound of Sandra's frantic heels. It was the heavy, confident, and angry thud of a man's dress shoes. A moment later, Ben Foster, the gate agent, stormed onto the plane. His face was a mask of bureaucratic rage, his tie slightly askew, his complexion a dangerous shade of red. He didn't even see Marcus. His eyes locked on Sandra, who was cowering near the galley, her back pressed against the wall. "Sandra!" Ben shouted, his voice echoing through the silent cabin. "What in God's name is the problem now? I have the tower screaming at me. This flight is a code-share disaster, and I've got a gate full of angry passengers wanting to know why this plane is back. What did you do? You said you had it handled." Sandra, paralyzed by pure, unadulterated terror, couldn't form a word. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide and vacant. She just lifted one, violently shaking hand, and pointed. Ben's eyes followed her finger. He turned. He saw Marcus Thorne sitting in 1A, a glass of top-shelf scotch in his hand, looking at him with a gaze as cold and flat as a sheet of ice. The rage on Ben's face didn't just fade, it short-circuited. His mouth, which had been open mid-yell, hung slack. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a blotchy, uneven white. "You," Ben whispered, his mind fumbling to connect the man in the hoodie with the man in the first-class pod. "What? How did you? The manifest." Mr. Foster, Marcus said. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the cabin with more authority than Ben's shout ever could. Come here. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. Ben Foster took a step, then another, his gait stiff and uncertain, as if he were walking on a deck in high seas. He stopped a few feet from Marcus's seat. Sir, I don't understand. How did you... The manifest... We had to reseat you. The manifest, Marcus repeated, the words tasting like ash. You mean the flimsy piece of paper you printed for 34B? The one you shoved at me like I was a piece of garbage you were sweeping from the floor? The one you gave me after you looked at my black Amex, my driver's license, and my $4,000 ticket and decided, no, not him? The system. It was an operational error, Ben insisted, his voice cracking, grasping at the only excuse he had. It was a full flight. I was just following procedure. Stop. Marcus's voice was flat. Don't lie. You've already done enough damage. There was no operational error. The error, Mr. Foster, was yours. You looked at me, in my hoodie and my joggers, and you made a judgment. You saw an easy target. You saw someone you could push around to make your day easier, to accommodate an influencer who was probably getting a free flight. You decided I didn't belong. You wielded your tiny, insignificant bit of power, and you put me in the back of the bus. Am I wrong? Ben, seeing his career flashing before his eyes, tried to find a foothold in anger. Now listen here, he blustered, his voice trembling. I don't know who you think you are, but you can't just... You can't. Marcus ignored him, as if he had ceased to exist, and turned his ice-cold gaze on Sandra Davis. And you. If Ben was a wreck, Sandra was a demolition site. She let out a small, strangled sob, and her knees seemed to buckle. She pressed her hands together, as if in prayer. No, please, Mr. Thorne, please, she wept, the words tumbling out in a desperate, incoherent stream. I have a mortgage. I have kids. It was a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. I didn't mean it. If I had just known who you were, I would never have. That's the entire problem. Marcus's voice cracked through the cabin. Not a yell, but a sharp, powerful roar of pure, focused rage. He slammed his empty scotch glass down on the console, and the sound was like a gunshot. Mr. Henderson in 1B visibly jumped in his seat. Stop saying that, Marcus commanded, his voice vibrating with an intensity that pinned every person in the cabin to their seat. Stop saying, if I had known who you were. It shouldn't matter who I am. I could be a janitor. I could be a teacher, a soldier flying to see his family, a student flying home for the first time. I was a customer who paid $4,000 for this exact seat, and you treated me like a piece of trash. You treated me like a criminal in front of an entire plane. He stood up, rising to his full 6'2" height, his shadow falling over both of them. He was no longer just a passenger. He was an executioner. You, he said, pointing a finger at Sandra, didn't just dismiss me. You enjoyed it. I saw your face. You smirked. You called me non-compliant for daring to ask for the seat I paid for. You threatened me with federal charges. You sicked your captain on me. And then you got on that PA system, and you announced my humiliation to 200 people as a joke. You told them I was confused. He took a step closer and Sandra flinched, pressing herself harder against the galley wall. "You have 14 prior customer complaints for this exact behavior, Sandra. I know. I checked. Hostile, discriminatory, abusive, targeted a passenger of color. You were a known liability, a cancer this company refused to cut out, and you knew it. You did it because you thought you could, because you saw a black man in a hoodie, and you thought there would be absolutely no consequences. You thought I was powerless." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a deadly, personal whisper. "You were wrong." Right on cue, as if summoned by the finality of his statement, a new figure appeared at the jet bridge door. It was a woman in a sharp, dark blue suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face set in a grim, all-business expression. It was Catherine Price, the head of HR for Global Transport Holdings, and she was flanked by 2 Port Authority police officers. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice crisp and professional, acknowledging him with a slight nod. She was holding a tablet. "Catherine, thank you for coming. You're just in time." Catherine Price turned her gaze to the ashen, shattered employees. Her eyes were devoid of pity. "Mr. Foster, Ms. Davis, I am Catherine Price, Head of Human Resources for Aero Wing." Ben Foster saw his last chance. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice high and reedy. "I'm union. You have to go through the union. I'll file a grievance. This is highly irregular. You can't just fire me on a plane." Catherine didn't blink. She looked at him as if he were a bug. "Mr. Foster, your union protects you from unfair labor practices. It doesn't protect you from termination for cause. And as cause goes, this is a banquet. We have a plane load of witnesses. We have video from other passengers, which is already being sent to our legal team, and we have a direct confession of discriminatory practices from your purser. Your employment with Aero Wing and any subsidiary of Global Transport Holdings is terminated, effective immediately, for gross misconduct, willful violation of company policy, and," she tapped her tablet, "a direct violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We will be contesting your unemployment claim. We will be fighting your grievance. You are done here." She then turned to Sandra, who was now just a weeping, hollowed-out shell, sliding down the galley wall. "Ms. Davis, the same applies. 14 formal complaints in 24 months. 0 change in behavior, despite multiple warnings. You are a multi-million-dollar lawsuit that we, for some reason, allowed to keep wearing a uniform. That stops today. Your employment is also terminated, for cause." "No. No. Please," Sandra whispered, the words barely audible. "My family. My 20 years. You should have thought of that before you violated federal law," Catherine said, her voice like granite. "Officers," she said, nodding to the police, "please escort these former employees from the premises. They are now trespassing." The officers stepped forward. "Mr. Foster, Ms. Davis, will you come with us, please?" Sandra collapsed into a full, wailing sob, and one of the officers had to gently but firmly lift her by the arm to guide her off. Ben was a bright, sputtering red, shouting, "You'll be hearing from my lawyer. This is an outrage. This is... But his words died in his throat as the officers guided him forcefully onto the jet bridge. The door closed behind them, sealing the cabin once more. The silence that returned was different. It was the silence of a fever that had just broken. Catherine Price looked at Marcus. "And Captain Miller, sir?" Marcus looked toward the sealed cockpit door. He felt a profound sense of exhaustion. This was the worst part. The captain. The man with 4 stripes on his shoulder, the man whose entire job was safety and final authority, had failed the most spectacularly. "He stays," Marcus said, his voice heavy. "He is to fly this plane to Los Angeles. It will be his last flight for this company." He picked up the cabin phone, the one Sandra had used, and dialed the 2-digit code for the cockpit. After a long pause, the first officer answered, his voice a barely audible squeak. First officer." "Put Captain Miller on the line," Marcus ordered. There was a muffled sound, and then a new voice. Shaky. Dead. This is Captain Miller. Captain, this is Marcus Thorne. Your purser and gate agent have been terminated and removed from the aircraft. You will now do your job. You will fly this plane and all 200 passengers safely to Los Angeles. It is the last useful act you will perform for this company. When you land, you will be met on the jet bridge by Ms. Price and our entire West Coast legal team. You are suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation, which I will personally oversee. I want you grounded, your license reviewed by the FAA for failure to exercise appropriate command, and your pension frozen. Sir, Mr. Thorne, please. Miller's voice was a desperate plea. It was a crew matter. I was following my purser's lead. You threatened a paying customer with arrest, Marcus said, cutting him off. You did it to cover for your crew's bigotry. You failed in your primary duty to protect your passengers. All of them. You are the captain of this ship, and you drove it straight into the rocks. Now, you will close this door, you will stop talking, and you will fly. Marcus hung up the phone without waiting for a reply. He handed the receiver to Catherine. Thank you, Catherine. I'll see you in LA. She nodded once and left the plane. The jet bridge door finally closed. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed. The plane, nearly an hour late, began to push back for the second time. A moment later, Mark, the junior flight attendant, approached Marcus's seat. His hands were visibly trembling. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. Mr. Thorne? Sir, he stammered. Can I get you anything? A refill? A hot towel? Dinner? Marcus looked up at him, his gaze softening for the first time. Mark, isn't it? Yes, sir. You were the only one who looked uncomfortable. You questioned Sandra just for a second before she shut you down. I noticed that. Mark looked impossibly relieved, as if he'd been granted a pardon. I knew it was wrong, sir. She's the purser. You were silent, Marcus said, not unkindly. That's what a toxic culture does. It makes good people silent. It makes them complicit. That ends today. From now on, you're not silent. You see something like this, you report it. You report it to me, directly. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Mark said, his voice stronger. Thank you, sir. Now, Marcus said, leaning his head back against the seat, the exhaustion of the last 72 hours finally hitting him like a physical blow. I'd like that refill. And then, I'd like to not be disturbed until we land. I have a company to fix. What we just witnessed wasn't just a story about a bad flight. It was a story about power, prejudice, and the difference between authority and leadership. Sandra, Ben, and Captain Miller had authority, and they used it to humiliate someone they thought was powerless. Marcus Thorne had real power, and he used it to deliver instant, devastating karma. Their careers were over in less time than it took to taxi to the runway, all because they judged a man by his hoodie instead of his ticket. This is a reminder that you never, ever know who you're talking to, and that respect isn't something you give to people who look the part. It's something you give to everyone. Period. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you were on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to see karma served cold. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and ring that bell. We have so many more real-life stories coming your way, and you don't want to miss a single one.